Beginning our Daf Mesechtes Bava Kama Daf Nun Ches, we begin 7 lines down at the top of the Yomid, with the Gemara is in the middle of a conversation from the previous Daf. We had mentioned the halacha of our Mishnah that if the animal fell into a garden and it got hana, so the owner has to pay not what the damage was, it just has to pay what the animal benefited. And Rabbit qualified this teaching to say, oh, that's benechvita. But if it ate, then it's not going to pay even mashenenes. So the Gemara ultimately qualified on the top of our Amid to say, no, loy mibaya achla. We don't have to tell you that if it ate, of course it will pay mashenenes. But nechbeta, you would have thought to say that it's mavrichari, that it's just, it's time to discuss at length when you say mavrichari, when you don't. But it's when someone you're just saving someone from damage, but it's not something that was necessarily going to be type of damage. Like Tais explains, really we're saving the animal only from tsar. So you would say that you don't get compensated anything. So that's the Kamash Malon to say that no, Mavrich Hari has no peseda or is done midas. Here it's shaloi midaita, and there is a peseda, and therefore the owner of the grain that the animal fell on will get compensated at least mashenenes. That's the Gemara will continue now discussing, qualifying this halacha of the Mishnah of nafla gina, what exactly happened that the animal fell, that we say that it has this halacha will only be mishalemes mashenenes. Throughout the entire world. So we're discussing today's daf, like we say, nafla gina benenes. The case of the Mishnah that falls into the garden and has pleasure. Mishalemes mashenenes, you pay not nothing, but not mashehizik. You pay mashenenes. Now the difference is of a yard the kedarka bezik, says the Mishnah. If it went down in its normal way in the damage, then mishalemes mashehizik has to pay whatever the damage was. There's a machlekes in the Gemara regarding how it fell. If shadachsa chaverta, that its friend pushed it, the other ox pushed that ox and it fell in, would that also qualify with halacha of nafla or not? The nechvita, that regarding, as we had mentioned from the previous daf, that if the animal did not eat the produce, but rather the produce cushioned its fall, that was Rab's chiddush to say that even over there you can have the halacha of mishalemes mashenenes, it's not mavrich hari. The differentiation between ba'isa aruga in the same row itself versus maruga laruga, if it goes from one row to another row, that then there will be a liability and you won't have the same exemption. Like we said, the Mishnah says that it goes down to some way damage. So machlekes on the Shimon how to qualify the payment, the assessment for the payment of the damage. Tanakama says, Shaman Beisa, Ba'isa Sada, Kama Yaf. You look at a large area and you say, okay, in regards to the large area, how would we qualify the amount of the damage? Which that's not going to be as severe of a payment. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says no. If it ate peiros gemur, mishlemes peiros gemur, same. If it was finished produce and even still it's still attached to the ground, you can evaluate it as it is. The opinions in the way to assess the value of a beisah, the Gemara brings, which was we'll see. That's why Tais disagrees with Rashi. Exactly what is this? It sounds like there's a few steps over here, but it's a saw in regards to 60 saw tarkav in regards to 60 tarkavim, or a klach, a stalk in regards to 30 stalks. And then the Gemara discusses regarding meniski gufay, that this all we were discussing up until now how to assess the payment was regarding niskim amoinai, which was regarding a shiur. Let's say meniski gufay, if a person causes damage to a field, do you also look at it in regards to the larger picture, or do you say no, you have to pay what you damage and that's that? To begin the current daf nun ches, 7 lines down at the top of the Yaman, daf nun ches. Heichin nafel. So we said this was the case that we were discussing regarding nafel gina benenes. Mishalemes mashenenes. Someone's animals fell from above into another person's garden and benefited from the produce. The owner pays only for the actual benefit, but not for the entire damage. So what exactly caused this animal to fall? So it's machlekes. Rav Kahana Omar, he says, it actually slipped on its own urine from the street to the garden, which that's an oinus where the owner would not have entertained to know that this would happen. And then he falls, slips down the slope into the guy's garden. He lands on the guy's grain, ruining the grain, but it saved his fall. So the animal was saved from pain. That's the same as shlemes mashenenes. That's one interpretation. Rav Ame says, we're talking about where another animal shoved it and it fell down into the garden. So the Gemara explains, The one that says that one animal pushed the other one. If that's an oinus where one animal is pushing the other one, for sure slipping on its urine is for sure going to be considered as an oinus. But the one that says when he slips on its own urine, but he would hold if another animal shoved it, pasha, that would be considered as a negligence of the owner of the animal. And if that's not considered an oinus, then we have to pay what the damage was, not just mashanenis. Because the victim could tell him, he should have had them pass one at a time, not having them both trying to get through and one pushing the other one down and falling into the garden. And therefore, that's the ramification of this machlik. Now, the Gemara explains this halacha the Mishnah of Kahana. It says, Loishan, we didn't learn that it will pay what it has the benefit and not what it damaged. Again, whatever the oinus was, Ella only if it ate right away, ba'isa aruga, in that row itself where it fell in, since it was an oinus with the fall, it's an oinus also. Now what it's going to eat over there, because since it sees grain beneath itself, it's like, hey, what's right beneath me? He's not going to be able to get the animal out. It's like, hey, I see food. Like, okay, we just died. We almost died. Let's eat this food over here. That's considered part of the oinus. Aval, but if let's the animal then goes me'aruga from one row to another row, and then it eats, then mishalem is mashazeka. Then it has to pay what a damage was, because like the last words of Taisus on the bottom of the it says, it's like a different field. It's like a new Indian. And therefore, although it fell, that's one thing, and the row itself that it fell onto is one thing. But it gets up, it goes to another row, that would be a regular mazik of shame that you would have to pay the full damages. Rabbi Shloimy says, no, not true. Even from one row to another row, even the whole day, it's walking around, it's eating up this guy's whole field. Until it leaves the ladas and comes back with the awareness of the owner. Until that point, it's only going to be mishalemes mashe nenes. Amra Papa, he says that loitema, don't say achatete ladas. Don't say that, it's only going to be up until that it left, that the owner, meaning the owner knew that it left. V'tachz ladas, and that it went back with the owner's awareness, meaning that he didn't, let's say, lock the door in front of it appropriately, that then, only then are you going to be liable with both those together? No. Ella rather, kimin sheyatzis ladas, once the owner knows it left that original field, avapisha chazra shaloi ladas, even though it went back shaloi ladas, Rashi explains what the Gemara means to say is that ladas means to say they didn't lock in front of it appropriately. So the chiddush he's saying is, even if it went back shaloi ladas, that it doesn't help now anymore a shmira pachusa. It doesn't help that you did somewhat a modicum of protection. No, even though you're totally unaware when I locked the door. No, that won't be helpful anymore. Maitam, what's the reason? Because the Amalei, because the owner of the field could tell him, even the Yalfa, since it learned that already, that it sees that there has some free food over here in my yard, anytime it's going to get out, it's going to run over there to my field, and therefore it's already, where a lot of behaviorism we learn that from animals, that it's already been wired already to see that it can get some free food, Wendy's free lunch, and it's going to come and eat by me. So therefore, that's the chiddush, that as long as it left ladas, you know already, even though it came back shaloi ladas, you're going to have to pay masha hazeka. Now, the Mishnah continued and said, Yardu Kedarka Bezika. Now, this was all if it fell into a garden. If it went down in the normal way in the damage, Mishalamis Mashazeka has to pay what the damages was. Now, Bar Yirmi had the following question. What happens if Yardu Kedarka? What happens if it came down in the normal way? Bezika B'mei Leda. And then the damage with the amniotic water, the birthing water. Now, what's the halacha? It gave birth, and the water that came out ruined the guy's produce. So what's the question? So the Gemara says like this: according to the one who holds that if initially there was negligence, meaning, as Rashi explains, we'll forget about the birth. The owner of the animal should have protected it; it doesn't go in and eat someone else's produce. But that's not what ended up happening. But Seif B'Ayin, the end was like an Ayin. He didn't know the animal was going to give birth suddenly and just give way, and all the birthing water will spill all over here. Chayiv. If you hold tchilas b'shivas ben chayes, okay, like the brother, there's no question. Obviously, you can be chayiv. for this situation. The question becomes, according to one who says, even though initially there was a negligence. But if at the end of the day, what happened was the oinus, pater exempt, so what would the halacha be? So what's the question? So Gemara explains. Do we say, given the pater? Okay, so you're pater. Because ultimately, the fact that it just gave birth is something that's an oinus. Who here is total negligence. Why? They gave him the kachazi, the krevel, since he saw that the end was close to giving birth. He should have protected it, as you continue to Beis, and to watch it, to be careful with it. Like some police can bring down when a woman's in the 9th month all the way at the dirt. She's got to let her go to sleep near a hospital because you know this is happening any moment. You can't be machal shabbos like that. I'm saying you know that she's about to give birth to this mother cow, and maybe it would be considered as a negligence. Take a let us test. It's not clear. Is this only a tchilas b'pshia, but if a sefer would be b'aynis, or is this even a kula b'pshia because you knew that it was going to give birth and therefore it's near negligence? The Mishnah said, "Ketzad mishalem is mashazika." So we said if it was yard the gedaka went down the normal way, then you got to pay what the damage was. So how much, b'chulu, etc. Which we had two different opinions. We had the Bava Kama that says that you evaluate a beisa in that field, how much was it worth and how much is it decreased in value of the entire beisa. Shimon says, like we said, well, if it's full, if it's actual fruits, then you pay for actual fruits, whatever the exact amount of it was. So it says the Gemara, Menon Amili. Where do we know this halacha that the Bava Kama says that you look at it in the context of a whole area and not for the damage of the fruits itself? So I'm going to mask this. It says, the post says in Shemais, when it talks about the mazik of Shein that we're discussing, it says, ubir b'stei acher, that it consumes in another field. This teaches that you evaluate based on another field, which is the area of a beisa. Says the Gemara, what? That's what you're learning from these words? You needed to teach you something else. It's saying that if it's going to graze in another field versus in a public area, which is not someone else's field, then you're chayiv. But how are you learning out that it's regarding the tashlumin that you evaluate based on another field? It says, yeah, because if that would be the case, if we're only learning out lafuki rishos rabim, should have said if it consumed in his friend's field, inamisteach or another field. My bisteach, what's that base over there? What's in another field? It means that you evaluate based on another field, so you don't look at it as just the immediate fruits that it ate and say, okay, you ate $10 worth of fruits, you got to pay. No, we look at it in the regards of an entire field. Says the Gemara, but wait, say maybe say you're right. The whole teaching is teaching you bisteacher in regards to a whole field. So lafugushas ramanel, how do you know that actually that the liability of Shein is only in the private area, not in the public domain? Says Gemara, no, if that would be the case, so if it was only teaching regarding the payment of how we evaluate based on a comparison to a whole field, so then this halacha of bisteacher should have been written in the context of monetary payments, which at the end of the pasuk it should have said, the best of his fields, the best of his vineyard, he has to pay for the mazik of Shein. Bisteacher in another field, meaning in comparison to another field. So lomali the kasverach monagabi a beer. So why does it say this halacha of bisteacher in regard to the hezek in the area where it talks about the actual damage of consuming? Bisteacher is teaching me that the payment is regarding to other field, Beisa, and it says in regard to Ubir to tell me that the mazik of Shein is only going to be Bisteacher in the Rishus HaYachid in someone's private area, not in Rishus Rab. Okay, now here it gets a little bit complex. We're going to go with Rashi, but Taisus has many difficulties with Rashi. How do we evaluate? The Mishnah said, okay, so we don't just evaluate the actual damage itself. We go and we evaluate based on a base saw. So how do we do this? So Rabbi Shloimy says, okay, saw b'shishim soim. So what does this mean? Rashi explains. When the Mishnah said you look at a base saw, because of one row, you evaluate a base saw, it's not that you can evaluate the base saw on its own self. Because it says Rashi, that would be very harsh on the mazik, on the perpetrator. Why? Because the base saw actually is sold for a very high price. Why? So Rashi says something interesting. He says because it's not so much, and it's not so common to be able to sell such a thing. Why? A pauper, a poor guy, he can't afford a large amount of property, so he has to pay for whatever he can get for way more than its value. So missing one row of a kav or two kavim is considered very significant according to the monetary value proportionate of that base saw. So to evaluate based on the base saw would be very harsh on the mazik regarding the pricing. Rather, we evaluate 60 saw. How much is that worth? And then we see how much money would be proportionately a 60th of that, which is a base saw. And then you evaluate how much is that missing because of what was done to that one row inside the base saw. Now, says Rashi, if you're going to say, then why are we mentioning base saw if we're ultimately saying going compared to a 60 saw? Says Rashi, no. Because if we would originally evaluate straight that one row in regards to the 60 saw, how much it would originally was worth, how much it's worth right now, you wouldn't be paying much. Because missing one small row is not so recognizable in this huge plantation of acres and acres. But by base saw, it's recognizable. So if you look at the base saw in regards to the shishim saw, you look at that row in regards to the base saw, there's something over there. That's how Rashi explains. He says, where do we find that there's two different types of evaluations? He says many different difficulties with Rashi's interpretation, but this is how Rashi says it. The next interpretation, Rabbi Yanai Amar, he says it's tarkav. It's tarkav is tray and the kav. It's 3 kav, which is actually half of the base saw. B'shishim tarkavim, in 60 tarkavim, which in other words we evaluate 30 saw, not 60 saw, because says Rashi, if you're going to do it the way the Rabbi Yosef Chanina said it, so then you're going to be causing a huge loss for the victim, because it's not so common to find people that could buy 60 saw, because it's too much for the middle class, and it's too little for the wealthy. As we know that this discrepancy was there back in even Talmudic times. The uber wealthy are, the 1% of the population. For them, it's not worth it for me to buy such a small thing. And for the middle class, it's too much. So therefore, it would be a loss to the victim because it wouldn't be that much money. So it's half of that amount. Half of that, okay, the middle class could already buy. That already makes more sense for the valuation of the damage. And the third opinion, Chizkiyami says, it's kelach b'shishim klachim. It's a stalk in 30 stalks, meaning it's whatever it ate. You evaluate whatever it ate in regards to 60 times its amount. So you're not going to just evaluate one stalk, that would be very harsh. But you look as if there's 60 stalks and one missing. Okay, we'll see how much Okay, it's only 59 now. Okay, fine, I'll charge you this amount. That's how you evaluate. Now, Meisved, the Gemara asks on all of these opinions from the following brisa. The brisa says, "Achol kav kavayim." If animal ate 1 kav or 2 kav, we don't say tesham de mehem. We don't say you pay the actual value of how much they would be sold in the marketplace, 1 kav or 2 kavin. Rather, we look at it as if it's a small row. And you evaluate the row, and then you know how much the payment is for a kav or 2 kavim. But says the Gemara, my love, isn't it b'fnei atzma that you evaluate the row on its own, and not in regards to 60 or 30 times that amount, and that's difficult on all of them? Says the Gemara, no, b'shishim. Each one holds 60, meaning not 30 because there was only regards to a saw, but meaning 60 times the stalk, 60 times a tarkav, 60 times a saw, whichever one it is. Everyone agrees that you'll evaluate the aruga, but then the question is, in what comparison everyone agrees it's going to be 60. So the Gemara, learn the brisa. Ein shaman kav. We do not evaluate a kav itself, what the damage was, because that's going to make it very strong. V'loy beis kor, but neither do you evaluate 30 saw beis kor itself, because that's going to make it deficient. Says the Gemara, Kama, what's the brisa saying? It's pretty enigmatic. So my Papa says, Hachim, it's really the halachas we were saying just before. But he says it regarding the mazik, meaning, Ein shaman kav b'shishim kavim. We do not evaluate a kav in 60 kavim. Meaning, if let's say the animal ate a kav, we don't evaluate the kav directly to 60 kavim. Mazik, because what happens is 60 kav can't be sold because, as Rashi says, it's too much for a pauper and it's too little for the middle class, and for sure too little for a wealthy person. Moreover, missing a kav is not so recognizable in 60 kavim. So it would be giving the mazik an upper hand. He wouldn't be paying much for the damage of his animal. But if let's say the animal ate a kur of grain, you're not going to evaluate in 60 kur. They should pay mazik, because that's going to make it really harsh on the mazik. Because a person that's very wealthy, has a lot of assets, he wants to buy these big properties. So when he could find such a big property, and he's going to build some development with 600 houses, this and who knows, so he'll pay way more than its value, because for him it's worth it for him to get such a thing. Moreover, like Rashi explains, the missing area of a core is very large. So if you went and evaluated a core in regards to 60 core, that would be a huge liability on the mazik. So rather, Rashi explains what the Bryce is saying is, no, every saw you evaluate in 60 of the saw, but not a core, and neither a kav. A kav is too little, a core is too much. A saw is the right proportion to what we call the Goldilocks effect, not too hot, not too cold, not too hard, not too soft, but rather this one's just right, and that's the one, that's how you evaluate for the mazik and the nizik, that it's not too much or too little. But the problem is, Maskevler Rav Huna bar Manoach, he says, hi, v'loy base kur. This that you're saying that you don't use a base kur, which was the words of the Brisa, that's an area. But it should have said volume, the kur itself. In other words, like we said, that we don't evaluate a kav. There was the volume. It didn't say a base kav. So why are you saying by kav the actual kav, and then when you talk about kur, you say base kur, which is the area? So because of that, he says actually hachitani. The way you have to read the Bryce is actually regards to the nizik, to the victim. What does that mean? So the Gemara explains, Ein shem kav b'fnei atzma. You don't evaluate a kav on its own, nizik, because that would give the benefit to the victim, because you would evaluate it as its own self. So not like we said before that we're talking about Ein shem kav in regards to 60 kavim, which that was talking about mashbiach and paigim regarding the mazik. Now the Gemara is switching it around. We're talking about regarding the nizik, and it's talking about just evaluating the thing itself. We're not going to evaluate the kav on its own, because obviously that's going to give the victim way upper hands, like he sold it in the street. Just the thing itself is going to get, that's very harsh for payment. And v'loy kav b'beis kur. This is why we have to switch it around, because where does a base kur come in? We're not talking about evaluating a core itself. We're talking about, and don't evaluate that kav in an area of a core, which a bald spot like that of what was eaten wouldn't be so recognizable. They should poigim nizik, because that would be a flaw for the nizik. He would barely get anything then. That's why we're picking a base core, because it's in comparison to an area. Ella b'shishim, like we said, you'll evaluate the kav in regards to 60 kavim. That's how you'll do it, but you won't do it by the kav itself or regards to a base core. You'll evaluate it the way that seems like from the Bryce is a kav in regards to 60 kavim, but you'll have to evaluate based on 60. The Gemara brings a story. Hahu gavra the cuts kashva. There was a person that cut a palm tree mechavri from his friend. So also coming to the Resh Galusa, came in front of the Resh Galusa, the one that was in charge of the Jews in the diaspora. Amalei, the Resh Galusa said to him, "Look, l'didi chazili says I saw v'tlasa ta'alsa b'kina b'kaimi. There was 3 palm trees near each other. V'v'shava me'ezuzi, they were worth 100 zuz, and you cut down one of them. So zil havli tlasin v'tlasa v'tilsa. Give him 33 and a third. Good math over there, right? That would be a third of the 100. Amar, so he says, Gabi Resh Galusa, the doin dina de parsa, by the Resh Galusa, who judges the laws of the Persians, which is not biblical, which is not Torah law. Lamali, what do I need this for? He says he didn't agree to what Resh Galusa had paskin. So also coming to Rav Nachman, they came to Rav Nachman, Amali b'shishim. He said, no, you don't have to pay the actual value of the tree, which is 33 and a third. You evaluate in regards to 60 times that amount, and then you see which is going to be much less of a payment of Hezek. So Amalei Rabba, so Rabba, when Rabba heard about the psak of Nachman, he said to him, if they said that we're going to evaluate in regards to 60 to be lenient on the mazik, that was beniski memainai. That was regarding what his animal ate and damaged, which is the theme of our Mishnah. Yomim b'niski gufa, did they say this when the person himself actively went and damaged with his hands and cut down a tree? That George, we're going to only charge you for, so in regards to 60 times the amount, we're not going to charge you for the tree itself? Wait a second. But this guy gufa, when the guy causes damage himself, my daitach, what's your understanding? Because they tell you in the brisa, hamavkir, which means to destroy and to wipe out, karmei shel chaverei smada. Let's say someone ruined his friend's vineyard that was smodar. Smodar is when there's small, immature grapes. So we see the vineyard, how much was it worth before this guy ruined it? How much is it worth less now after that? And that's how you pay. Now but so this is when the guy ruins his friend's vineyard. It doesn't say, and that's what Rabbi you're coming from probably, that doesn't say in regards to 60 amount. Sounds like you pay the actual damage itself. But then he says, but what's your raya, Rava? You think we didn't say the same wording regards to one's animal? The time like learned the Braisa that an animal that was cut manatia, that cut down a sapling. So Rabbi Shloimy says, the ones who decrees on Yerushalayim, in Yerushalayim, meaning to say that they're the ones who assess the penalties. That's Admoin and Chonam ben Avshalom, and the last paragraph in Mesechta Ksubos describes them. So they say like this: Netia bashanasa, a sapling in its first year, shtei kesef is going to be two silver coins. Bashtei shalom, if it's already in its second year, our kesef will be 4 silver coins. Achel chaziz, if it eats shachas, which is the vegetation in its early stages, Rabbi Shloimy says nidin b'meshuyer shabai. So we evaluated based on the remnants, meaning we see the leftovers according to what each row would be coming towards in the harvest season, and you have to pay that amount. The sages, they say that actually we see it of how much it was worth, meaning the property to be sold when it was with the shachas. How much is worth less now without the shachas. Again, we're saying like a whole teaching. We're going to point out. We want to bring out just one point, but once we bring in the whole brisa about these different halachas about ruining crop. As you get into the top of the Testament Aleph, achlas madar. If let's say the animal ate these small grapes when they're just starting, after they're just started budding. Shloimy says, so you look at them as if they're grapes ready to be harvested, which is the actual value itself, and they say no. We look at the field, how much it was worth, how much it's worth right now. Meaning, we look at the property to be sold when it's smodar, and they're coming to be more lenient. Shimon Yehuda, he says, wait, when we say this, that we're going to evaluate it in regards to the property. That's when they ate the shoots of the vines, which the cluster is seen when the grapes are starting to bud, and they're recognizable, but they didn't yet blossom to be full-fledged grapes. That's the lulav, and so too the churei te'enim, which are the branches of a fig tree. That's when we'll say we'll evaluate it based on the field. But if it ate it when it was already half ripe by the figs, like beiser or beiser by grapes, which is like the size of a white bean, which are full-fledged pears already, then right nice and kilo anavim I'm this about. So then says Reb Shimon, then we already view it as if they're grapes ready to be harvested, and then you pay for it itself. Okay, this was a long brisa, but says the Gemara, Ketani Mias, one thing we see is the sages, they said, remember, this is an animal eating. We view how much it was worth and how much it is worth. It doesn't say anything about 60 in regards to 60 times the amount. What do you have to say? It's b'shishim with 60. So he says, also you can say b'shishim. In other words, basically he was asking on Rava that, what are you asking on Rav Nachman, that you see, niski gufay, it's not, you never find shishim, because when we have a brisa it says Hamafka Kamashal Chavera Smad, you look at it, and doesn't say Shishim. He says by Hemti also don't say Shishim, but we know it's with Shishim. So by Niski Gufa also could be with Shishim, and there was not going to Nachman, it could be Niski Gufa, it's also going to be with Shishim. Thank you to any time for hosting us.